Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne on a very hot autumn afternoon, and in fact it's been very hot for the last 2 days and it will be hot again tomorrow. So much for autumn weather. But if you're new here, despite the heat, I try to grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia without a greenhouse or grow lights or humidifiers, just me and them outside or inside or not at all. So plant lovers of the world, if they sound like your conditions, do hit subscribe. I post every week. I am an amateur and my ramblings are just that, but sometimes I stumble upon truths that work for me and they might help you. And apologies for the slight huskiness. I was in South Korea last week and have come back with quite a nasty cold. Anyway, it was of course, well, early spring in Korea, but it was cold as, and it's boiling hot here. So I just don't think that combination has done me much good. But anyway, what has done me good and perked me up no end is that this weekend is the Orchid Species Society of Victoria's orchid sale. And so, plant lovers, I may have purchased. Yes, plant lovers, do I really need any more orchids? Well, no, all we need is shelter and love and food. However, when confronted with a room full of fantastic growers and their knowledge and their plants, what can you do? And there was actually one thing, actually two things I had in the back of my mind that if I found them, I would get them, and I did, but we'll get to those. So I think what I will do is just go through this tray one plant at a time and show you what I bought, perhaps justify the reasoning and have a little chat about them. Amazing things. But the first moral of this story, before we go any further, is that I knew that this sale went on because I belong to the Orchid Species Society of Victoria. Now, wherever you are in the world, there is bound to be orchid clubs, and it's a fantastic way to find out what people are growing in your area, to get tips and advice, because generally a lot of those growers are very experienced. But perhaps most excitingly is that often at every meeting, but certainly at regular times throughout the year, those societies and clubs will have sales, either raffles or auctions within the meetings, or once or twice a year they'll have a big sale like this one. Now in Victoria, where I am, there are several organisations and there are a couple of specialty ones. So this group specialises in species orchids. There's also a native orchid society in Victoria, and there's also one specialising in cymbidiums, which I think, plant lovers, I might have to join. So I'll put the link below to all the orchid societies that you can find in Victoria so you can have a look. But if you're in Australia, you'll find similar organisations which tell you all of the different clubs and when they meet. And if you're anywhere else in the world, just have a Google for orchid club near me and see what turns up. So that done, let us now have a look at this tray of plants one by one. So I'm going to move them off and just look at each one with you. Okay, first cab off the rank might look familiar, but before we get into this, let me just set the scene for you for the sale. I'll drop some footage in here. So as you can see, you never quite know what you're going to find at this particular sale, but also any sale. Orchid species, though, I think is a really great sale, and it doesn't just sell species orchids. There are lots of hybrids there as well. So you can see there was a lot of great Zygopetalums, which I just walked right past because I just can't get zygos to bloom yet. Work in progress, watch this space. Again, wonderful Masdevallias, lots of Oncidium types, lots of Cattleya types, and Mount Beanock orchids were there selling their wonderful Masdevallia and Sarcochylis. Now, plant lovers, I walked right past the Sarcochylis because I think I have enough, and did actually buy a lot from those guys last time. So those seedlings are all coming along very nicely, and hopefully all should bloom this spring, so we can do a little review of those. I didn't need any more. Always lots of people and lots of really great plants. So when I went in, the first thing I was hoping was that Michael Coker was going to have a stand there. Now, Michael, I've just made two videos with. One was about deflasking orchids, which I'll link here, and one was about growing Phragmipediums, which I will also link here. Now, I've only ever tried a Frag once and failed, but I learned so much from that video with Michael, as I'm sure everyone else did. And I was hoping that he would have some Phragmipediums on his stand. And sure enough, plant lovers, he did. And in fact, this is, if it's not the actual plant, then it's certainly the same variety that we looked at in the video. So this is Phragmipedium Eric Young crossed with besseae. There we go. Now, I am literally following Michael's advice, because he did say for someone like me, just beginning in my Frag journey, you're much better off buying a flowering size plant than wasting your time with seedlings. There were a lot of seedlings at the plant sale again, and once again I walked right past them because generally don't have the time and patience anymore, plant lovers. Some things that are hard to find are certainly worth buying from in a seedling form, but yeah, as we all know, they can take a long time, so just be judicious in your seedling buying. So Michael suggested I buy a mature plant, and lo and behold, look what I found, this beautiful specimen of this Phragmipedium. And you can probably see there, it's got a fantastic new growth coming here and a fantastic new growth coming here. And just to recap what Michael said in our video, first thing is plenty of water, and he only uses rainwater or distilled water. Now here in Melbourne we have amazing tap water, and I use tap water on every one of my orchids, but I will not on this. I will follow Michael's advice, and in this house I will use distilled water, and when we finally finish our renovation and move, we actually have captured rainwater, so it'll be very easy for me to water with rainwater there. The other thing is a regular application of dolomite lime in solution, and what Michael uses is just the fluid you get to change the pH of hydrangeas and change their colour. Very easy to get from garden centres to hardware stores, so I'm literally this afternoon off to go and get myself some of that. And the other thing Michael pointed out too is that they can basically bloom at any point of the year once the new growth has matured, and that the flower spike is capable of producing numerous flowers. And in fact, this one has got another bud forming at the top there and there. So we've actually got two spikes, one from each growth, and each spike has got multiple flowers. So Phragmipedium. And I only bought one because I just want to give this one a go and see if I can crack the nut of care for me. Now I'm going to keep this indoors all year. I could bring it out in summer and in winter, but I just don't think I need the hassle. I'll just keep it indoors all year in a bright indirect spot. So in the southern hemisphere, it'll be north facing where we get most of the light. In the northern hemisphere, that would be a southern window. Yeah, and we're going to see how we go. Regular feeding, regular watering with distilled or rainwater, and a regular dose of dolomite lime. So there we are, my first mature Phragmipedium, which I need to keep alive because it wasn't cheap. But you know what? Flowering size plants never are. Okay, next cab off the rank. Look at this, and its form will probably look quite familiar to you. It's a Calanthe type of orchid. Isn't that fantastic? But look at the size of it. Now, Calanthes are terrestrial orchids. Often they're really, well, relatively smaller. This one is just massive. And look at those pseudobulbs, quite incredible. So this is one of those Calanthes that is deciduous. And its name is Calanthe vestita variety Rubra-Oculata. I don't know if you can read that mossy label. Anyway, very excited by this because of the size and the form of the flower. Now I've got a few Calanthes, hit and miss, touch and go. So I'm gonna really focus on this one. Now some I've had great success with, the deciduous ones, and some not. It's all in the fine art of what dry winter means to you and to the orchid. So I spoke to the grower, which is the great thing about attending a fair like this, that you can talk to the person who's growing it in the same city as you and find out what they do. And even if their conditions aren't quite the same, even if they've got a greenhouse and you don't, you can kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. So with Calanthes, they produce all this amazing growth during the warmer summer season. So starting in spring, they'll produce a new growth that matures. Then come autumn, sort of fall, autumn, this time of year, as you can see, these leaves are just starting to brown off. So these leaves will die and drop, and what you'll be left with is a pseudobulb like this with no leaves. But what this is doing, which you can just see there, is flowering. So it will produce this flower spike now. And this is quite a tall, beautiful, multi-bloomed spike. Can't wait to see it. So once the flower has died and all the leaves have gone, you really reduce the watering. Now, a dry winter. So these deciduous types, you do need to keep dry, but not bone dry, so don't desiccate them. So the thing is to find that happy balance where you just keep the soil moist occasionally, you don't let it dry out too much, but if you keep it too moist, it will rot really, really quickly. So it's tricky, plant lovers. This one I am going to keep inside all year, just because I am. I think for me it's easier to manage the dryness inside than outside. So when this blooms, I will certainly show you, but it's fantastic orchid. And look at the size of that plant, so healthy and wonderful, and great to talk to the growers about how they look after it. And then from the same growers, I kind of talked into this. I'm a very willing victim, I feel. Obviously, as you can see, quite a similar type of orchid, similar family. But this is one of those orchids that goes under many names, but I've just double checked with Q, and the correct name is Dienia offridis, I think is how you pronounce it. But there are many synonyms, including Maxillaris offridis, Maxillarius latifolia. Anyway, the Dienia name is the one that Q is saying is the current name. So there's the plant, as you can see, in scale, very different to this one. Very similar habit though, it is a deciduous terrestrial. So once again, you need to ease off the watering almost completely once it drops its leaves. However, this one is quite interesting because its range is basically all of Southeast Asia, all the way down to the northeast of Australia, to the Northern Territory. So the Northern Territory here is a sort of a monsoonal climate where it has a very dry season and a very wet season. So it does need to be kept dry during that dry season. And it actually comes from the same neck of the woods as Cymbidium caniculatum, which has a very long dry period here. Anyway, oh, I've just noticed there's a little new growth coming up in the bottom there. Let me move the tag and you can see it. Can you see that little green spike? How exciting. That could even be, could it be a bloom? No. Probably not. Anyway, this one has a tall spire of a flower. And actually, I'm not sure if the flower comes from the base of the pseudobulb or from the top, most likely from the base. But anyway, that could well then be a flower spike. Quite an unusual form, quite tall, and these very, very beautiful lush leaves. Once again, we'll lose all of those, leave you with the pseudobulb, which you have to keep dry until in spring you get the new growth, then you begin your watering and feeding regime. And both of these will need quite a lot of feeding during their growing season because they have a lot to do in a short period of time. Anyway, I was kind of talked into this, but I wasn't. I'm looking forward to seeing what this will look like because the flower is unlike anything I have. So there we are. That is Dienia offridis. Next cab off our rank is this plant. Very, very handsome and beautiful it is too. And it's actually a Maxillaria, which I have vowed I needed no more of. And it's Maxillaria cucullata. There we are. And there was a lovely lady there at the fair called Agnes who was adamant that I should buy this. So Agnes, many thanks for your encouragement to buy this. I did. I have recently made a film about Maxillaria nigrescens, which bloomed for me, and the flowers were massive and very fragrant. And I felt that I'd reached peak Maxillaria with that. Anyhow, there was one of these in bloom at the sale, and the flowers were quite unusual. And that's what drew me to the plant. Anyway, it's a very, very healthy plant. There's lots of new growths in there. And it should actually be flowering at this time of year. So there's a slim possibility that we might actually get a flower spike from this one. Not sure. The other example was in bloom, as I mentioned. So there we go. Another Maxillaria. I didn't realize my life was not complete without it. But thank you, Agnes, for the encouragement to buy it. And actually, thank you to many of the people who came to say hello. It always amazes me that anyone watches these videos because when I started to make them, I really never in my wildest dreams thought really anyone would watch or be interested because I am really an amateur and there's so many more specialists out there who know far more than me. But anyway, it is always so thrilling to meet people who watch the video. So thank you to everyone who said hello. Now this is a plant. This was the other thing I've always had in the back of my mind to want to find. And is it Trichopilia, Trichopilia, oh, I can't pronounce it. Anyway, there we are. And it is Trichopilia turialbae. I'll work on pronunciation of this one. Now, this is a cool cold growing orchid with really beautiful flowers. There's quite a few in that family. And I've had it on my list of things to find because they are cold growing and they can live outside in Melbourne all year throughout our winter minimums, obviously just under cover, protecting them from rain. So always really keen to find one. Very hard to find. But Michael Coker, who I mentioned before, had these mature specimens on his stand. So I was very, very excited to find one of these. So this I'm very keen to grow on, very keen to see if I can get it to bloom. I can see lots of action in the base of the plant in terms of little bumpy things, which are either new growths or flower spikes. I can't remember what time of year it blooms. So not sure if what we're actually looking at is just new growths or potential flower buds. Anyway, a plant I've always wanted to find, never been able to, so very happy with that. Next cab off the rank, something hanging. Now, I don't go out of my way to find hanging things because I can only hang things that can live outside all year, because I can't hang things inside because watering them is impossible. Anyway, this plant can happily live outside all year, and it is an epidendrum called porpax. A curious thing, it's going to be very happy just living on this piece of tree fern bark basically forever. Look at the beautiful burgundy leaves. It's an odd plant. It will have little little flowers not dissimilar to that Epimedium polybonbon. Interesting colours, and are they fragrant? Can't remember now, I did have a look. But I just love the bronze form of this, and the fact that really, plant lovers, this is just going to hang up and do its thing in a reasonably bright but not too bright spot, and I'll just leave it to it. So what more can you want from an orchid than nothing to do? And this also came from the wonderful greenhouses of Michael Coco. So I think really anything that he had always sparks interest. So let's see what this looks like when it flowers. And also from Michael, look at that. And that is actually a Cattleya. It is Cattleya araguaiensis. Quite an unusual form of flower and particularly hard to come by in Australia. A vague fragrance. Not a particularly fabulous one, I have to say, but an interesting one. Actually, it reminds me of another orchid, can't remember. It actually smells like it looks, if that makes any sense. A slightly brown, almost spicy fragrance. Anyway, interesting little plant, interesting form. Why I felt my life wasn't complete without this, I don't know, but I just like the form of the flower. So we'll see how I go with this. This is going to be an indoor grower, as it is not a cool lover, but a very interesting plant, and I will probably do this one outside in summer and inside in winter. This can split its time, but a beautiful little plant and a fantastic flower. So let's see how I go with that. Next cab off our sale rank is this, quite a sizable plant, as you can see, and there are the flowers. Now, the thing about this was that I have just never heard of the name before, and it is called Propetalum Mathina. There you go. Now, the thing, once I Googled it, that intrigued me and made me want to own this orchid, you can see the flowers, which are quite interesting. It's a cross between Zygopetalum and Promenea. Now, I've just made a video about my Promenea, which is just over there actually. A really small, compact plant with the most incredible blooms, and a cool, cold grower. Lives outside all year for me in Melbourne. I've never been able to get Zygopetalum to flower for me. However, this is a cross between the two, and it's a bit like crossing a Great Dane with a poodle, I think, just in terms of the size, relative size of the plant. So I was intrigued, but the flower is kind of interesting. Maybe not. Anyway, I'm going to grow it on. It can live outside all year, certainly likes the water, and I'll be very interested to see what the flowers are like next year, if I can get it to flower, because I have not a great strike rate with Zygopetalums. And then our last cab off the rank is this beauty. And look, you can see it has got 1, 2, 3 spikes, which is fantastic. And it's a Miltonia. And it is Miltonia spectabilis, but it's variety Moreliana. And that I do not have. So the flowers on this variety are bigger and a deeper colour. And Miltonias just do really well outside here for me. They can take our cold, cool winter nighttime minimums undercover, keeping them dry so they're not wet and cold. But Miltonias just seem to love our environment here in Melbourne, which is interesting because a lot of them are from the Atlantic coast of Brazil there in a very particular biome. Anyway, they're loving life for me, and this one hopefully will also love life. As you can see, I've made videos about Miltonias. They are real rhizomous creepers, so they can be tricky to pot. And I'm going to try and get myself a basket for this. I won't repot it now as it's autumn, we're going into winter, but in spring I'll probably repot it into a basket so it can just tumble about. do its mad thing and flower beautifully. Now the flowers are about to open, so when it does open, I might show you what they look like, even though of course I had nothing to do with producing them. Well, there we are, plant lovers. What a great haul. It was such fun. So once again, many thanks to everyone who said hello, and many thanks to all the sellers who gave me their tips on how to grow these things successfully. Many thanks to Michael Coker for having a flowering size Phragmipedium that I can have a go at. Fingers crossed with this one. Anyway, plant lovers, moral of the story is join an orchid group near you. You'll learn a lot, meet great people, and have the opportunity to buy some fantastic and unusual plants that you'll never find anywhere else. So there we go. Plant lovers, thank you very much for watching. If you're interested in what I'm doing next week, which I certainly am because I don't know what it is, you'll have to hit subscribe. I do post every week on a Friday. My ramblings are amateurish because I'm actually sitting right next to the compost bin in which many of my orchids have ended up. But if you do want to know what I'm doing next week, hit subscribe and tune in next Friday, and I look very much forward to seeing you then.